I knew something was off the second I pulled into my driveway. There, parked right inside my garage like it belonged, was a strange SUV. It wasn't mine, it wasn't my sister's, and it sure as hell wasn't a neighbor's. To make matters worse, the garage door was wide open, like a giant neon sign announcing that something ridiculous was happening in broad daylight. I had only been gone for 8 hours. 8 hours. And in that short time, someone had decided my garage was now their personal parking space, as if they had just claimed it by sheer entitlement. At first, I tried to be reasonable. Maybe it was a mistake. A lost delivery driver, a confused Uber looking for a client. But as I stepped out of my car and got a closer look, that sinking feeling in my gut told me otherwise. The SUV was parked perfectly, too perfectly, like whoever had done this had taken their time making sure it was neatly inside. The doors were locked, and to top it all off, a half-empty iced coffee sat right on the hood, condensation still fresh. Someone had been here recently. I checked my front door, untouched. Nothing else seemed disturbed, but I needed answers. So I headed straight to my neighbor's house. That's when I met her, Karen. She appeared before I even knocked, stepping out of her house like she had been waiting for me. Short bob haircut, oversized sunglasses, and an expression that screamed, "I dare you to challenge me." "Excuse me," I started, keeping my voice calm. "Do you know whose car that is in my garage?" She didn't even hesitate. "Yeah, it's mine." I blinked. She sipped her drink. "I'm sorry, what?" "I parked there," she repeated as if that answered anything. I waited for her to explain. She didn't. "So you just parked in my garage?" I asked, trying to make sure I hadn't completely lost my mind. She scoffed like I was the unreasonable one. "It was empty. What's the big deal? You weren't even using it." Oh, this was going to be a problem. I took a deep breath, pinching the bridge of my nose to stop myself from losing it. "Karen, this is my property. You can't just park in my garage because you feel like it." She rolled her eyes. "Well, I was in a hurry, and your driveway is too sloped for my SUV. You have so much space, and since you weren't home, I figured, what's the harm?" The sheer audacity almost made me laugh. Almost. "The harm," I said, my patience slipping, "is that it's illegal. It's trespassing. Move your car." She folded her arms. "I will, but I have errands to run, so I'll get to it later." "Later," I repeated, now actually laughing in disbelief. "Number, you'll move it now." Karen let out the most exaggerated sigh, like I had just asked her to pay my mortgage or something. "I can't. I'm going out with my friends. Just be a good neighbor and let it be." And with that, she turned and walked back into her house, shutting the door in my face. I stood there, jaw clenched, trying to process what had just happened. I had met plenty of entitled people before, but Karen was playing an entirely different game. I could have called the cops. I could have had her towed. But something about her smug little smirk as she dismissed me, that ignited a much pettier fire inside me. Fine. She wanted to park in my garage so badly, she could stay in my garage. Without hesitation, I walked back to my house, grabbed the garage door remote, and manually locked it from the inside. Then I secured the side door with the deadbolt, double-checked everything, and made sure there was no way in or out. Then I packed my bags and left for a week. What I didn't know at the time was that Karen had made one critical mistake. She had gone into the garage before I locked it. Maybe she had forgotten something in her car. Maybe she just assumed she could come and go as she pleased. Either way, by the time I was halfway to my vacation destination, enjoying a drink by the beach, Karen was trapped. Inside my garage, with no way out. Back home, the neighborhood was starting to notice her absence. Her husband, Greg, seemed mildly concerned, but not enough to actually do anything about it. From what I later found out, he assumed she had gone on a shopping trip or a spontaneous girls' getaway. But her best friend, Susan, she started raising questions. Meanwhile, inside the garage, Karen was just beginning to realize how bad her situation was. No phone signal. No real food except for some stale protein bars I had forgotten about. And worst of all, no bathroom. By day 3, she was desperate. She had tried everything, banging on the walls, honking the horn, until the battery died, even attempting to squeeze through the doggy door. I wish I had security footage of that. Meanwhile, I was blissfully unaware. enjoying my trip, until my phone buzzed with an unknown number. "Help me, you monster." I stared at the screen, confused. Then another message popped up. "You locked me in, you psychopath. Let me out." And that's when I realized what had happened. Karen hadn't just parked in my garage. She had parked herself in my garage. And now she wanted out. I wasn't exactly in a rush to fix her problem. After all, she had told me to be a good neighbor and let her park there, hadn't she? I smirked, put my phone away, and ordered another drink. Karen could wait. By the time day 4 rolled around, Karen had gone through every emotion: rage, denial, bargaining, full-blown desperation. She had screamed until her voice was hoarse, kicked the walls, and even tried to pry open the garage door with a tire iron she found in the trunk. Nothing worked. Her hope had been that someone, anyone, would notice she was missing. But Greg? He wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed. And honestly, he was probably enjoying the silence. The neighbors? They didn't like her enough to be concerned. The only person who could fix this was me, and I was nowhere near in a hurry to do that. Food and water quickly became her biggest challenge. A desperate search through her purse turned up some breath mints, an empty granola bar wrapper, and a half-full bottle of overpriced alkaline water. It wasn't much, but it was something. Then she scoured the car, rummaging through the glove compartment in center console like a raccoon in a dumpster. Jackpot, a pack of stale crackers, a melted chocolate bar, and an old energy drink. It wasn't gourmet, but it was something. But the bathroom situation? That was a nightmare. She held it in as long as she could before finally resorting to an empty Starbucks cup in the back seat. Humiliating, disgusting, and something she would never speak of again. By the third day, she was starting to lose it. The walls of the garage felt like they were closing in. The air reeked of desperation, and she had spent far too much time talking to herself. Or, more specifically, talking to the iced coffee cup. She named it Wilson. Wilson became her only companion. By the time she had officially gone full castaway, the neighborhood was finally beginning to notice something was off. And me, I was still on vacation, sipping margaritas, enjoying every second of it. Karen was losing her mind. She had full-blown conversations with that cup, Wilson, blaming me for trapping her, blaming Greg for not noticing she was missing, blaming the universe for daring to put her through something like this, as if she were too important to suffer. One afternoon, in a moment of desperation, she remembered the tiny window near the ceiling of the garage. It was too small to crawl through, but it was something. Maybe she could wave someone down, scream for help. So she got to work, stacking anything she could find. First the hood of her car, then she climbed onto the roof, wobbling like a circus act with zero training. When she finally reached the window, she could see the street. Freedom. So close it probably hurt. She started waving her arms, screaming like a madwoman, but there was no one. Except Mr. Jenkins, the old guy from down the street, who strolled by wearing his noise-canceling headphones like he always did on his daily walk. He didn't even glance in her direction. Her last hope was honking the horn again. But after draining the battery 2 days ago, that wasn't happening. So she sat there, back on the roof of her car, staring at the tiny sliver of sky through the window, realizing she was still trapped. That was about when her phone vibrated. Hope surged. Maybe she could call someone. Maybe Greg. Maybe Susan. Hell, even 911. She scrambled down, lunged for the phone in the cup holder. The screen was black. Dead. She shook it, slammed it against the seat. Nothing. And then, as if the universe had a cruel sense of humor, she heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Finally. She scrambled toward the door, heart pounding, ready to be saved. But when she saw who it was, relief turned to rage. It was me. The garage door started opening slowly. The first sunlight she'd seen in days flooded in, blinding her. And as soon as the door was halfway up, she bolted. Karen exploded out of there like she'd been shot from a cannon. Hair wild, clothes wrinkled and stained, dragging Wilson behind her in one hand. And there I was, standing next to my car, sipping an iced coffee, watching her like she was a stray cat finally leaving a box. "Well," I said, smirking, "looks like someone's had a week." Karen was vibrating with fury. She stormed toward me, screeching like she'd been holding it in for days. Her voice was raw. "You absolute psycho! You locked me in there. You left me to rot. Do you have any idea what I've been through?" I took another sip of my drink. Calm. "I figured you'd move your car when I asked you to." Karen's fists clenched so tight I thought she might punch me. She was filthy, exhausted, and clearly about to snap. "I'm calling the cops," she spat. "You're going to jail for this. This is illegal. Unlawful imprisonment. You're done." I tilted my head. "Go ahead." She faltered, just for a second. She wasn't expecting that. She was expecting panic, backpedaling. But I was cool as a cucumber. I pulled out my phone and unlocked it. "You want to use mine? Since yours is probably dead." She stared at me, confused. And that's when I popped the trunk of my car and pulled out one of my security cameras. Held it up so she could see the footage playing on the tiny screen. Her face drained of color. "There you are," I said, keeping my tone casual. "Marching into my garage, ignoring me when I asked you to move your car, telling me you'd get to it later. And there's the best part, when you snuck back in to grab something and I didn't see you." I paused for effect. "So, technically, you locked yourself in." Karen's mouth opened, but nothing came out. She searched for some argument, some defense. But she was out of ammo. "Please," I added, slipping the phone back into my pocket, "call the cops. I'd love to show them the footage." She took a shaky step back. I could almost see the gears turning, trying to find a way to salvage this. You can't prove I was in there for a week," she blurted out. "For all anyone knows, it was just a couple of hours." I smiled. "Aside from the text you sent me?" I unlocked my phone again, flipped through the messages and held up the screen. Her frantic messages flashed in front of her. "Help me, you monster. You locked me in. Let me out. I've been here for days. I'm losing my mind." Karen's jaw clenched so tight I thought she might shatter a molar. And just when things couldn't get worse for her, Greg showed up. Finally. He pulled into the driveway, hopped out of his car, and took one look at Karen, wild-eyed, filthy, waving Wilson like a weapon, and said, "Babe, where have you been? Susan said you dropped off the radar." Karen whirled around, pointing at me like I was the villain in a bad movie. "This lunatic locked me in his garage for a week." Greg looked at me, then at the camera in my hand, then back at her. "Wait, why were you in his garage?" "I parked there," she snapped, "and then he locked me in." Greg scratched the back of his head, clearly wishing he was anywhere else. "So, why did you park in his garage?" Karen's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. "That's not the point." I cleared my throat. "Your wife trespassed, parked in my garage without permission, ignored me when I asked her to leave, and then got stuck because she snuck back in while I was leaving. I've got everything on camera, including the text Greg exhaled like the weight of the world had landed on his shoulders." "Karen, did you really do that?" Karen's face was nuclear at this point. She was ready to explode again, but nothing came out. I clapped my hands together. "Look, I'm not going to press charges, but I'll be installing a new security system." Karen scoffed, trying to recover some dignity. "Like I would ever park in your garage again, you psycho." I smiled. "Good, then we're on the same page." She stood there, arms crossed, seething. Her eyes promised revenge, but she had nothing to throw at me. She was outplayed. And then, as if the universe wasn't done messing with her phone buzzed. A notification from the HOA. A hefty fine. Unauthorized use of another resident's property. Multiple neighbor complaints. Effective immediately, her community privileges were revoked for a year. No pool, no clubhouse, nothing. I gave her a little two-finger salute. "See you around, Karen." She glared at me like she wanted to set me on fire, but there was nothing left to do. She turned to Greg and barked, "Drive!" He didn't argue. He backed the car out and drove them away without a word. I watched them go, then turned back toward my house, shaking my head in disbelief at how simple it had been. I'd won. And the best part? She'd done it to herself.